right, we are rolling. So, is it okay if I call you Andy?
Yes, please. That's what people call me.
Tell me about the genesis of Get Bruce. How did you come up with this idea to do this documentary?
Well, I had, first of all, I'd been making quite a few documentaries about the making of movies. I had done an hour-long piece on A Star is Born with Barbra Streisand, and I did an hour-long documentary that PBS ran on the making of Annie. And even though my main business is doing trailers, I always enjoyed doing these documentaries and had fun doing them. And then I saw the Mizrahi documentary on Zipped, which I thought was just terrific. And I thought, you know, I should do something like that. And then I gave it some more thought, and somebody said to me, why don't you do something like that on Bruce Vilanch? And I thought, well, wow, that would be terrific. So I approached Bruce, and he said, yes. And I said, look, I'll do the directing and the camera and all that part, and you supply the stars, which he did. And we were off and running. Originally, I did not intend to finance it myself, but I ended up doing so because the more we shot, the more fun it was. I just said, oh, I don't want anybody else telling me what to do. Let's just keep doing it. And it took us 2 years, actually, all told.
Interesting. Now, behind the scenes of a movie sounds a little different from what you were doing with Get Bruce, because you're dealing with a lot of different personalities and a lot of stars on the behind the scenes of award shows. What is that a different kind of a challenge, or are there any other differences?
There was a tremendous difference between shooting behind the scenes with what Bruce does and shooting behind the scenes in movies. The big difference is this: movies are repetitious, and it gives you a chance to shoot the same piece of action from a variety of angles. What he does is all spontaneity. Movie sets are boring. People finally settle in, they get relaxed. You can take your time. You're there for a whole day. What Bruce does is write shows that are in a state of panic from the very beginning. When I first went backstage at the Oscars and saw what went on there, I couldn't believe it, and I could understand why they didn't want me backstage at the Oscars. It is absolute pandemonium. If you put a light on anybody, they freak out. Everybody involved is tremendously nervous. When people make movies, they're not nervous. When people appear live on television, they're all nervous, and it's a very, very nerve-wracking procedure. And I wish that I could have gotten more in Get Bruce of what really goes on, the way they're pulling at Bruce from every direction, you know. Shirley MacLaine needs you, this one needs you, that one needs you, you know, and it's, for the cameraman, you wouldn't know where to put the camera. Whereas in a movie, you look at the scene being shot once and you know, I'll put it behind the camera this time, and the next time I'm gonna shoot with the director in the shot, and then I'll shoot this and that. So I'd originally intended to do something more similar to what I did with Annie, the behind-the-scenes show I did on Annie and on A Star is Born, but I couldn't do that. What Bruce does is too fleeting, and movies are much more repetitious.
Now,
We've got a minute and a half.
Okay.
Change it?
let me finish this next question. We'll change the tape. Why did you think the story on Bruce's work and his life would be interesting to American audiences, and why did you want to direct it?
Well, I knew that for a fact that people had no idea whatsoever that somebody actually wrote what seemed to be spontaneous remarks, that there was an actual writing process in what Whoopi Goldberg says at the Oscars, or Billy Crystal says, or what Robin Williams says, or what Bette Midler says. People actually, when I first started showing little pieces of it to people, they were amazed that somebody actually wrote that stuff. They thought that it was all came off the top of their head. And I do think it was very generous of all the stars to allow us to reveal that fact, because I think they would prefer for people to think that it actually comes from them spontaneously.
And why did you want to direct this particular documentary?
Oh, I wanted to do a behind-the-scenes document. I hadn't done one in a while because Entertainment Tonight put me out of the backstage business. In the old days, the studios hired me to do behind-the-scenes documentaries to promote films on television. The minute Entertainment Tonight came along and would do it for nothing, come on the set, show a little piece, and get it on TV for nothing, they didn't need me anymore.
Interesting. Okay, why don't we change tape? I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Bruce. Do you think that American audiences will be surprised to find out that the words that their favorite people are saying was written by a gay man?
No.
Can you repeat?
I'm going to. I actually agree with Bruce that I don't think people think in those terms at all. Unless somebody is a political leader or a romantic leading man or woman, I don't think that kind of thought, the idea of whether they're gay or straight, comes into play at all. Years ago in New York,
Hold on one second.
I'm trying to remember this guy's name, Ray. I better not say his name either.
You were mentioning about...
Well, years ago in New York, I remember I dated a guy who was Nixon's chief speechwriter. And he was gay, of course. And I used to look at Nixon's speeches and see if there was anything about them that would suggest that they were written by a homosexual. And of course, they weren't. There is I've heard this said in Hollywood. I think this is an interesting insight. A well-known director who's a friend of mine who's gay, I heard a studio executives once say, well, he can't direct this heterosexual love film because he's gay. And I thought, wow, that's pretty stupid reasoning, because the best female characters ever written in the theater probably were written by Tennessee Williams, who's gay. The most powerful heterosexual relationships have been written by homosexuals. And I think, likewise, probably a number of straight writers have been able to write about gay people. The person who directed Philadelphia is straight. Tom Hanks is straight. I just think that's all very superficial thinking, and I think there's less of it today than there was before. I think that Hollywood, just like society itself, has changed, and attitudes towards homosexuality have changed. So I would just, if a young man came to me and said, let's say Leonardo DiCaprio were to ask me if he were gay, which he's not, if he would ask me, well, should I let it be known that I'm gay, I would advise him not to do so. I say, if you're somebody with a teen following, if you're a Ricky Martin, I think you'd be stupid to broadcast your homosexuality to the world. I think those agents and managers who handle people who might be in the closet, if their career is such that they're going to have to appeal to young girls or to families or to children, it's best left unsaid. People don't go around talking about their sexual life when they're straight so much. I think discretion is advisable. If you're a character person or if you're behind the scenes, I don't think it matters one iota.
Now, for yourself, you've not been in the closet since you've been here in Hollywood. Was that always the case, working in the industry, or was that a gradual process for you?
Earlier when I was in the business back in the 60s, I was much more guarded. I never lied or anything, but I was just more careful to use neutral gendered words if I went to events, I would have a date or something and, avoided the discussion. Then during the 60s, the whole sort of kind of hippie movement, the bohemian lifestyle that came to the fore in the 60s, gave a lot of people cover. You know, you could be gay and it just looked like you were, you know, enjoying the 60s lifestyle. I actually reached a point where I became so adroit at avoiding the issue that I found that I had a lot of friends who I wanted to tell, but I was now embarrassed to say it to them because they would say to me, well, why didn't you tell me this years before?
Yeah, let's hold that thought for this plane.
You start with the part you had a lot of friends.
Okay. I reached a point where I had a lot of friends that were pretty close friends that I had sort of fooled over the years. Not intentionally, but it just worked out that way. And I wanted to tell them. And it became difficult to tell them because I was fearful then of them saying, well, why didn't you tell me this before? How could we be friends and you withhold that kind of information? The way I actually forced myself out was I was working with a very big female movie star who saw me as a very eligible bachelor for her girlfriends who were getting divorced or had not married yet. And I found myself at functions sitting next to all these single women. I was out at the beach one day and her boyfriend, the fellow she was living with at the time, called me and said, Andy, I heard you're out at the beach. We're just having a little dinner at home at our beach house. Would you like to join us on Saturday night? And I said, sure, but I'm with someone. And he said, oh, that's fine, bring them along. And I was with my lover at the time. And I brought him along. And the reaction was rather interesting. As we began the meal, it began to dawn on the star that this was my boyfriend. And she had a little bit of difficulty dealing with it. And at one point, actually had to get up and leave the table and stayed away for about a half an hour. And then she came back, and she was all right with it. And I thought to myself, thank God, if I can push this thing past Barbra Streisand, I can tell everybody.
That's a great story. In your film, I think Paul Reiser kind of makes a funny comment about Bruce being a good gay role model. Do you see Bruce as being a role model to the gay community?
Don't let this film fool you. Bruce is a very, very complicated fellow. And I don't have such a narrow picture of Bruce that I would see him as a model of anything. He's a very complicated guy. He's extremely decent, and what he's done for the AIDS cause in this country is immeasurable. He's too much of a muppet to be a role model, though, I think. I don't know. I don't have any role models myself, so it's hard for me to say.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chuck, there was
Sure.
a horn honk there in the middle of that.
Oh, okay. Can you repeat?
Just the beginning.
You were.
You might have reiterated that same point that
Yeah, I think he did. We don't.
You're probably not going to use that anymore.
Oh, I'm going to ask this question that I asked Bruce too. Tell me about the response you've been getting for your film at film festivals, and you've been screening it to friends. What has been the response to Get Bruce?
The response to this film at film festivals has been extraordinary. We were at Sundance. We had several screenings. The film played extremely well. We went to the Santa Barbara Film Festival, which is an older crowd, and it played like dynamite there. We had 414 people in the in the theater, and it played like dynamite. I have an older sister who lives in Leisure World, which is a retirement community. I loaned her a tape, and she started showing it to people in their 70s and 80s. And she said, Andy, they're falling out of the furniture. They're laughing so hard, and now I'm getting phone calls from people I don't even know asking to borrow the tape.
Did you expect this response?
Well, I hoped we'd have such a good response, but it's been, for the most part, better than I expected. What does happen, though, with audiences, that the film tends to skew towards slightly older audience. Very young people, I don't think are as interested in this film as an older audience, slightly older audience is. And I doubt that it'll play well way out in the hinterlands. I think you have to be sort of interested. In making the film, I threw out a lot of very funny stuff, because I wanted to concentrate on it being an educational piece, something that enlightened people as to how this process worked. So as I cut for information rather than for jokes. And I think one of the reasons that it does play so well and that it does get such big laughs is that people are perceiving it as a piece of information. And when you're thinking along those lines and then a joke comes at you, it's funnier than if we sat there and said, now here's some of Bruce's best jokes, and just started throwing jokes at you, you know. But I cut out a lot of great jokes. Bruce wrote the joke for Richards, the governor of Ann Richards, the governor of Texas, at the Democratic convention, when she said, "Poor George, he doesn't know any better. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth." And I was never able to use, and finally cut out, one of Bruce's funniest lines was when, after Paul Rubens had his problems, which was a scandal, he made a sudden surprise appearance on the MTV Awards, and he walked out, and he said, and this is a line Bruce wrote for him, he said, "Heard any good jokes lately?" And that was a joke I wanted to leave in, but we couldn't. I couldn't get it set up properly.
This is something I wanted to ask you that brings to mind. Did you take advantage of any of the newer technologies, like smaller cameras, or, you know, in order to get the access that you did? It was a lot of backstage stuff.
I made one big, serious technical mistake in approaching this film. I started shooting it on Super 16. I would never, ever do that again. I shot some of it, you know, on Digibeta. Ultimately, when it came time to blow this thing up to 35, the Digibeta blew up better than the Super 16 because of the process we used. We went with a process that's geared to blowing video to 35, not 16 to 35. Had I gone and blown the 16 up separately to 35, the finishing cost would have been prohibitive. In addition, in film, you're working with 10-minute loads. And every 10 minutes, just when something's going, you have to change. And that's a time-consuming process, as you know. Whereas with video, you have a 20, or at least 20, or usually a 40-minute load. The unions have different rules about film. I could have gotten more backstage if I'd been strictly on video, like at the Elizabeth Taylor thing. Because I was on film, I was prohibited from backstage access, because a whole different set of union things kicked in. Whereas if I'd have been video, I would have been perceived as news, and I would have had a greater access. When and if I ever do one of these again, I would only shoot it on video, even if I intended it for theatrical release. I think that Super 16 is totally untenable, and 35, forget it. You can't make a documentary in 35 millimeter.
I just have two more questions. I think
Sure.
we need to maybe gab your. Okay. The title, Get Bruce. Tell us how you came to that title.
The minute I thought of doing a documentary on Bruce, I thought of the title, Get Bruce, and I got it from the movie Get Shorty. Now, the title really refers to the fact that every single person in Hollywood who has to get up and speak on an award show or at a charitable event, the first thought that comes into their head is, get Bruce. His phone rings off the hook constantly. Everybody wants him to write for them. Those little one-liners, those little things that they have to say impromptu at award shows and on charitable events.
And this is my last question. What do you ultimately hope that audiences, including your older sister and her friends at the place where she lives, and as well as people in Middle America, come away with after they see your film?
Well, the film, as you know, ends on kind of a touching note. And I hope that people see, naturally I want people to be entertained and amused, and I want them to understand the craftsmanship of writing. But there's such a humanness quality to Bruce and so much humanity in him that I wanted people to see that. I wanted people to see that what a lovely human being there is inside of this preposterous-looking character. And hopefully it'll expand people's understanding of the human condition.